Welcome to our latest installment of Red Door Speaker Series, where we aim to educate, inspire, and inform our marketing and business community here. Few logistics. Session is being recorded, and we will send the deck afterwards, so you don't need to worry about that. We're also going to do a blog post recap that we'll post on Friday, so you can keep an eye out for that. And then in the upper right-hand corner there's a QR code. This has a survey, not a survey about the event, but actually a survey that would be great if you could take right now, if you haven't already done some pre-work, because we're going to be doing a little bit of a workshop exercise for the latter half of the presentation. So whether you're in person or virtual, you can take a quick shot of that QR code, pull up the survey. Should be pretty quick and easy. So get started on that while I do a little exposition. And click to the next slide. There we go. All right. Topic today, shipping logistics 101. No. Okay, you're actually in the right place. It's about marketing. But I think this cargo ship represents well that the world is changing more rapidly than ever. Chaos and uncertainty are kind of the norm right now, whether it's tariffs or wars or ceasefires or gas prices up, gas prices down a tiny bit. And then at the same time, this is impacting consumer attitudes and consumers' behaviors. We've got kind of the TikTokification of social algorithms. We have SEO shifting to SEO plus answer engine optimization. And this is all impacting how consumers are finding and selecting brands, right? This is a lot to keep up with for all of you. So we're here to try to help out with that a little bit. We've got a proliferation of channels and platforms. We've got a great deal of complexity in terms of measurement. We have a ton of different creative assets that we have to develop. And this also creates complexity, and it can be overwhelming. And I wouldn't blame marketers if they fell back to just a collection of tactics to get this stuff all done. But that's not how you're going to get the best results. The best results are going to come from building a system that combines your paid and your organic efforts into something that is greater than the sum of its parts. And so that is the topic today. And I can't think of two better people to speak to this. We have Emily Renfree, our VP of Integrated Marketing, and Megan Pontius, our Director of Organic. So I'm going to hand it over to the two of them.
All right. Good morning, everybody. Thank you for coming out early on a Wednesday morning to join us for this topic that I personally and Megan are very passionate about. What you see on the screen here is probably a more accurate representation of what a buyer's journey looks like in this day and age. It was never linear, but we like to think about it in a more fixed path that is certainly inaccurate. To make things more complex, every brand has its own version of this. There are different stages, behaviors, different points where decisions are ultimately made, and marketers have the wonderful task of navigating this on an everyday basis. To be truly effective, we have to be able to reach individuals at every touch point along this that could influence a decision down the line. And what we see far too often is a little bit too much credit going towards the bottom of the funnel. So in this particular scenario, branded search is getting 100% of the credit, neglecting the 15 prior touch points that ultimately influence that decision. This leaves brands struggling to budget effectively, to allocate resources to where things are actually going to move the needle. And measurement is a huge piece of this. Certainly, there's no single tool that ultimately can help you understand this entire customer journey. There are some methods that allow you to triangulate that, but it's certainly not easy to stand up, and marketers are faced with this challenge on an ongoing basis. Where do we invest? Where do we pull back? How do we make the most of our investment? That said, marketers are still tasked with addressing every single stage on a funnel. They're still responsible for introducing the brand to new prospects, for building preference for that brand over the competition. We want you to choose us versus the other competitors out there. In most cases, it's a highly saturated market, so competition is only increasing. And ultimately, you need to show up at that moment of decision too, to persuade clients or prospective customers to ultimately choose you. This complexity that we are facing hasn't changed the job of marketers or the responsibility of marketers at the end of the day. It has changed the job. But what this complexity means is we ultimately need to build a system that's designed for it, right? A more capable system. It's not a reason to pull back or just to fall back on simple habits that have worked historically. It's really about leveling up to embrace the chaos and the ambiguity that we're facing. So what are some of the disruptors today that have made that customer journey as complex as it is? I think we're all familiar with AI these days. AI has certainly had some pretty significant impacts on both paid and organic. It is condensing the discovery and consideration phases. So users who previously would conduct a Google search and then bop around from website to website as they were gathering information, now maybe the AI overview that's populating at the top of Google is answering their question without them having to take one more step. From there, sometimes they're conducting another search instead of going to your brand website. And what this means for marketers today is we are seeing approximately 60% of Google searches are zero click. So that means they're either already finding their answer within the AI overview or conducting another search. That leaves 41.5% of click engagement. So for SEO, that means less site traffic, which used to be the end all be all. Now SEO is becoming more about brand visibility than site engagement. On the paid side of things, if you have fewer people going to a website, that's fewer people to retarget. If you have folks who are being influenced earlier in that journey, then by the time you reach them with search, they may have already made their decision, so it may be too late. So it's really rewriting that entire process for both paid and organic. Then to visualize what that has looked like so far, what this tells me is the problem, if we want to consider it a problem, is not going away anytime soon. This is the last 12 months click-through rates for both paid and organic placements if an AI overview populated versus if it didn't. What you're seeing is everybody's being impacted, right? Whether you're organic, you're paid, there has been a steep decline over the last 12 months, and I anticipate that will only continue. There are some glimmers of hope. Other studies have found that if your brand is cited in the AI overview, then on the organic side, you are typically seeing about 35% more clicks. On the paid side, 91%. So if you can work in synergy with the organic team, that SEO team, to get cited in AI overviews, then there's a little hope yet. But regardless, we're seeing a drop in total clicks across the board. So that's something that marketers need to account for. It means strategy shifts, channel adjustments, given that the typical search behavior has really adapted pretty significantly. To make things even more complicated, search is also not just Google anymore. We, of course, have AI overviews. We have LLMs in general, folks who are turning to ChatGPT or Claude first over Google. I will say that's still a fairly small portion of the population relative to Google itself. but it's growing, right? So it's going to continue to be a disruptor in that space. Then you have folks that are looking for social proof more than they are brand presented evidence. So they're turning to forums like Reddit, YouTube, TikTok, Instagram, if you're of the Gen Z variety, and all these other places to ultimately discover brands that previously weren't a factor anymore, which means marketers are now tasked with also showing up in all of these places. And I suspect that some of these practice areas and visibility here may be owned by a team or two of yours, but there are probably other practice areas that currently are neglected altogether. So just one more consideration to add into the mix as you're moving into 2026 and beyond. So all of this is to say, our marketing leaders of today are facing immense complexity and fragmentation. So it's truly no wonder that programs can feel scattered, your days are chaotic, results probably aren't as maximized as they could be, and it makes perfect sense. There are many competing priorities. You're probably all faced with the demand to do more with less. So it's a trap that we've all found ourselves in. It's not surprising. It really makes perfect sense. And on the brand side, this is what some of that complexity can look like, right? So you've got your geography, where are our products offered? Where is our audience that we're trying to reach? Product lines. We've got audiences. Who are the consumers that are the best fit for our brand, our products? You have, of course, creative, channels, technology. All of these are different decision points that could result in success or failure, right? So all of these present opportunities for disconnect, right? If SEO isn't talking to paid, if creative isn't getting briefed with research, if email is running on a completely separate calendar from everything else, there's just a lot of opportunity for things to not be functioning quite as well as they potentially could be. And what that means is dollars left on the table. And it makes perfect sense when you think about how teams are structured. So marketing teams are inherently structured in silos. Marketing has been structured in a similar fashion. Of course, this is one iteration. Every brand has their own slight adjustments, but essentially they're thinking about things by business unit, by channel, by function, by platform. And while these structures do facilitate accountability, they also create those barriers. It's like your own internal walled gardens, and it really limits that cross-pollination between teams that is essential in today's age to navigate that consumer journey. Customers certainly do not care about your org chart. What they care about is how they experience your brand, whether it feels coherent or not. They notice the cracks. If you have a paid campaign that's out there feeling very promotional, paired with a blog post that feels a bit more sophisticated, and then that is accompanied by an email message that just has a completely different tone of voice, it can be very confusing for a consumer to know who you are, what you stand for, or to even identify your brand in the wild if it doesn't feel consistent. This is typically a result of those teams functioning in silos. Maybe you have an initial direction that you've been given, but then each team goes off and develops their own strategy, their plan of action. They have their own teams developing copy. And it makes perfect sense that things would go slightly awry when there are so many different cooks in the kitchen. And then, of course, all those teams have their own measurement methodologies too. What they deem as success may look different than another. And it can be very challenging to unify them. But when you do run things as a system, this story can really change. Brands can be experienced as a much more cohesive entity. Consumers can feel that. And collectively, you can be working towards a unified goal, whether that's sales, revenue, some sort of business objective that means your brand is thriving at the end of the day. So some examples of this in action. This is something you're probably familiar with, right? Bear with me. This is a paid search ad here at the top, followed by an organic result at the bottom. So studies have found, or I'll say many advertisers may assume that if I have a top organic result, I don't need to be paying for a paid ad to accompany it. Studies have shown that that is not true. If paid and organic are working together, then this is something that you can potentially surface through testing, right? But Google found that if you are running a paid ad and have a top organic result beneath it, 89% of the paid ads clicks are actually incremental to what you would receive on the organic. Of course, that's not universal. Every industry has slight nuances, but generalized, averaged, 89% is what they found. Similarly, if your organic placement fell off, the clicks that were lost, ultimately 50% of those were not recovered by a paid ad. So it just goes to show that paid and organic working together can really maximize the impact. And if those teams were functioning separately, they would never know it. They would never realize the lost gains.
Well, so then jumping into social media specifically, obviously on all of our social channels, we have a brand page or a company page, right? This is specifically looking at LinkedIn. I think the reason LinkedIn is used in most studies is just because it is so trackable, measurable, like they have the best analytics, you can put a link in anything. But I think these learnings can be put across any channel, really. So you're running ads, but you also have your organic followers, right? And what this is saying is that when you overlap in messaging between what you're showing your organic, right? So what you're posting on your page, what you're putting in your feed, and then what you're saying in your paid ads and targeting, 61% of followers are more likely to convert. Right. So it shows that it's because they've seen this messaging before, right? They're familiar with you. If we go back, which don't actually go back, but if we were to go back to the brand funnel slide, it's all about that. I think sometimes we think of awareness as this big bucket and you either have it or you don't. And it's really not, right? I have an entry point. Am I able to discover you? Okay, I discover you, but do you actually have salience? Do I see you all the time? This is a really old statistic, but for some reason it always sticks in my mind of it takes, I think just in human psychology, statistically 6 times of seeing something to actually remember it, right? That translates to marketing so heavily. So sometimes we have an ad, we've never done it, we post it once on organic. That doesn't build brand salience. It's that you're repetitively showing in front of them, right? Then there's consideration. Then there's a preference, right? So that is such a long journey. And sometimes we just bucket it as like general awareness, but that's really what social does. And when you pair them together, you're doing a lot of that in this organic side, right? No offense, nobody's trusting the ad, right? You see an ad and you're like, oh, I'm gonna scroll past that, that's an ad. Unless you've seen it somewhere before, a little bit more personal to you, whether that's from the page itself talking about it, whether it's from an influencer, a friend on social posting about it, right? So that's all that this is saying. And then the other statistic on the side is a little less of a specific measurement of like organic followers, but just generally you can increase your like lead pipeline by 2.5 times when you have that overlap versus if you're just running the paid ad or just, when we say single channel, that's what we mean here of like, it's just the paid ad on social or it's just in the organic messaging when those things work together. And I think sometimes when we think of together, and that's what we'll kind of get into today, we think of it as like, it's the same message, right? If I have a 50% off sale, I say that on organic and I say that on my paid ad. Like, yeah, that's a great start. And that definitely is coordinated. But I think what this is getting at is a little bit more, how have I told them everything that they need to know to then make the purchase so that when they see the ad, it's not necessarily the same exact messaging, but it's instead they feel trust. They know that they do want to choose us and they're ready to convert. Cool. And this is looking at email and paid social. So these statistics are a little bit more generalized. There's not a ton of case studies, I would say, in this realm of explicitly what people are doing and how that impacts. I think people just don't test in this area as often. So there's not a lot of, well, the test group was the control and we didn't do this. They're just like, let's lean in, let's do it. And if it sees good results, I'm going to keep going with it, right? But basically what this is talking about is the opportunity that we all have triggered emails, I would say, right? You have some sort of website activity, you send them a message. And we know that email is highly effective at doing that. So a lot of people jump on that, and that's great. That's like absolutely a must and a foundation. The opportunity is to a lot of new email providers, or with AI, you can probably build this pretty easily now, but you can build connectors to your like ad audience, right? And so now you're able to see that CRM activity, you're able to push that person, and yes, I'm going to send them the triggered email, but in between doing that, I'm going to send them a display ad. I'm going to send them a meta ad, right? And I know that when I say CRM activity, it's like they viewed a product and they abandoned it. They asked for a back in stock request. So now I'm going to put that image in front of them on display, as well as send them the trigger email, and you see some lift. So you can see a 15% in recovery rates, but also a 22% of email openers more likely to purchase. So let's talk about why that likely is. Inboxes are so full. I know everybody has that zero inbox mentality, but we all open it in the morning and we're like, oh, that 100, like that's crazy. And so this is kind of acting like billboard marketing, right? Where you're seeing it in a paid space. So you might not have gotten to that email. You might have glossed over that email because you're just fatigued. You go, we're kind of habitually online as just a generation, I don't know, of people. So we're going to be on some version of social. We're going to be on the internet in some way. And now you see a reminder of like, oh yeah, I did ask for that back in stock, right? That's why I'm going to go shoes because that's my thing, right? I did look at those shoes, and now I go back in my email and I see that back in stock, or I see that cart abandoned, and now it's a reminder to me. And so I'm more likely to go into that email and take action.
And it's a nice compliment, right? A display ad, small space, right? There's only so much you can communicate. An email is far more real estate to work with. So by pairing the two together, you can really convey not just that reminder, that urgency, but much more value proposition.
Yeah, the other thing I wanted to add here is I think, like I said, a lot of people are doing the triggered email. A lot of people might be actually feeding that CRM data or utilizing that CRM data for their paid retargeting already. It's really about, and you'll get into this, so maybe I'm getting ahead of cart before the horse here, but it's really about having that system in place, that it's not that I'm just pulling the list down, but that activity, and I can trigger that email so nicely to that activity, right? 2 days, 2 hours, whatever works for my audience. It's kind of building that with the paid component. So now you have a system of messaging working together.
Exactly. Thinking about every activation through the lens of the customer journey, not just as email, not just as paid, not just as SEO, but in combination. How can we make this a much more powerful engine? So those are some examples of how paid and organic working together can move the needle for your brand. But what are some of the risks that brands face if they continue operating in silos? I'll say there are 4 patterns that we typically encounter, and most organizations are experiencing nearly all of them to some degree. So first, growth left on the table. We just talked about what that can look like to a degree on the search side, but search is certainly not the only arena where that applies. Next, we have cannibalization and waste, brand dilution, and then misleading measurement. So growth left on the table. The Google search example was really a phenomenal one that's very easy to wrap your mind around, but it is certainly not limited to Google search. If 2 entities are working in silos, not testing and experimenting together, you don't even know what growth you're missing out on. So by working in synergy, designing those systems to find the efficiencies and to maximize your input, like the Google search example showcased, you're able to truly take advantage of the opportunities that don't require investment and minimize where, like with paid, you have to rent space essentially. Ultimately, that's going to drive more efficiency, maximize results for your brand in the long run. Then we have cannibalization and waste. So the opposite of unrealized growth. Where are you wasting investment? This was another example that came to mind. It's also in the search space, and I will caveat that eBay is certainly a brand a little bit different from the brands that most of us encounter. I think everybody knows eBay. They've probably browsed on eBay if they have not made a purchase, so that brand familiarity is very high. Affinity, folks know what they're getting themselves into with eBay. So not every brand, but what eBay did was ran a test where they paused their branded search, and they found that nearly 99% of those clicks were recovered organically because of their very solid brand positioning. But had they not run that test, they would continue to invest on branded search. And instead, they were able to reallocate those resources elsewhere where it could be more meaningful. So another example of how working in synergy can really identify how your dollars could be better spent to drive stronger returns. Then brand dilution. If teams all have their own marching orders, it is highly probable that they will be out there with different messaging, personas, and what this really leads to is just a confusing experience for your buyer. I know it's probably far too often that we encounter brands scrolling through their social feed, and looking at the feed alone, we're like, who is this? What do they stand for? Then you see their paid ads and it feels completely disconnected from that. You browse their website and the value prop that they're pushing with their paid ads feels completely different from the website pages. And all of that is just going to confuse users, confuse LLMs who are scraping all of that to identify who your brand is in ChatGPT. So it's just a recipe for disaster at the end of the day. And by working in a much more connected fashion, you can minimize that. And then lastly, misleading measurement. This is probably the most dangerous in my opinion. It can actively reinforce the wrong behavior. This all the time, particularly in the paid arena. Standing up different measurement methodologies is not easy. It is common for brands to fall back to attribution methods like last click because it's easy. It's easy to set up. It's easy to understand, and there's some value to it if you want to know what that final touch point was in the journey. But if that is your only measurement approach, then you're probably going to throw most of your budget into branded search specifically. So is that what is actually generating demand for your brand? Absolutely not. They have to already know who your brand is to search for you by name. So what that drives is investment flowing to the places that may be profitable and efficient for some time, but you're going to see efficiency wane. Essentially, your pond is going to run dry if that is how you are gauging success. Instead, if you can design a measurement system that considers the entire marketing mix, consumer journey, then there are ways to make much more practical and smart investment decisions that distribute credit more appropriately throughout that consumer journey and across all those touch points.
I was just going to jump in because I actually was doing something with Lauren the other day, and we were looking at measurement from two different tools. One was a first touch attribution and one was a last touch attribution. If you look at them separately, they tell like two completely different stories, right? Because they're definitely just different ways of looking at it. So I just think that's such an interesting exercise if you can even like flip the script a little bit. Like maybe you are measuring last touch right now. Take a test, measure first touch, see how they differ, and that like brings this picture to light, because when you look at them together, you can start to see that like, oh, we do have a sort of a system and it is working, which I think is what we came to. So like, okay, when you look at it, it might not be, when you look at one, it might not be working. When you look at them together, they tell like a bigger story. So I'm just throwing that out there as like a pretty easy little quick test you can kind of run on a channel or two just to see the difference.
Definitely. Every media platform has its own attribution methodology. They want to take as much credit as they can, right? So if you look at platform metrics, it's going to say one thing. That is going to say it drove 100 purchases. Then you look in GA4, it's a completely different story. In GA4, you can easily toggle between last touch and data-driven attribution. That's a really great place to start. Data-driven is more of that multi-touch equation. So it will give credit to other touch points in the journey. It is still click-based, right? So it is not going to give credit to billboard or a video somebody saw but didn't engage with. So that methodology is not perfect, but there are some other approaches that one can take to kind of dig into that. All right, so from our perspective, the best marketing teams aren't just running campaigns, they're really designing systems. They recognize these silo risks. They have identified the measurement gaps and they are trying to solve for them. What does that look like for those who are not already there? How can one begin to integrate your teams and function as a bit more of a well-oiled machine? So we have a few key components. I will say integration really requires much more than merely collaboration. We like to think of it as a system. At its most simplified, it looks like this. So first we have strategy, and I'll unpack each of these a bit more momentarily, but strategy really comes first. No brand can expect to hit a target if that target is undefined. So one must have a unified strategy to begin with. Then I like to think of measurement as the next step here. We need to know how we are going to be measuring that success. And oftentimes your tactics really have to be designed with measurement in mind versus the other way around. So understanding your measurement approach first and foremost can be really critical. Then we have marketing activation. So creative, paid, organic are all pieces of that. They all have to certainly work in synergy in a sequenced fashion to navigate that consumer journey. And then technology is another thread of this. Every brand has your own CRM, CDP, CMS that influence user experience, how sophisticated you can be with your targeting. So that's always a consideration. Have those tools been configured to the best of their ability to really facilitate that? And then there needs to be some sort of governance, right? All of these teams do have their own functions. And if there isn't a role that is connecting the dots, it can be particularly challenging to integrate these different functions. At Red Door, we senior leadership, so Megan, myself, Ron in the back, we all serve as what we call integration architects. And our role is really to partner with the SMEs that represent the different practice areas to disperse information appropriately, to identify testing opportunities, and really ensure that our programs are functioning in as integrated of a fashion as they possibly can. So sometimes that looks like re-envisioning our annual planning exercises and strategy. Sometimes it's a little bit more low-key, but it's a really critical role to have within an organization. So strategy. Strategic alignment is not the same as integrated strategy. I see that a lot, right? We came out of this exercise feeling really aligned about our post framework, which is the tool that Red Door uses to organize our positioning, objectives, strategies, tactics, target KPIs. But that alignment, while essential, does not mean that you're ultimately executing that in a connected fashion. It's the behaviors that happen thereafter, right? The planning that actually takes place, the measurement strategy that unfolds that can connect the dots across the various disciplines. But it is essential to have that unified direction to begin with. And then from there, all teams should really be operating off of one brief. They should be mapping to that audience journey in a unified fashion. And tactics are ultimately then designed around that. Then we have integrated measurement. So we've been hinting at the various different approaches that a brand can take to measurement. Unfortunately, there's no single methodology that is just the end all be all. So in this day and age, we really strive to triangulate the impact of our efforts with these three different tactics. So first we have our user level attribution. That's your last touch, multi-touch, what we're all probably familiar with. That answers a very specific question, right? It is about how your tactics are influencing the likelihood of conversion. It's fantastic for real-time optimization, in-platform optimization, but it certainly does not tell a complete picture. It can be really challenging to map that entire user journey, especially if the consideration cycle is lengthy, like many brands encounter. So actions that happened a year ago are certainly not going to be captured within most user level attribution. Then we have marketing mix modeling. Marketing mix modeling is a very powerful tool that can help you answer the question of where is my spend going to stop delivering returns? But marketing mix modeling is not easy to stand up. It requires at least 2 years of really clean data to train these models to deliver outputs that are going to be meaningful. So it's something to work towards, but you're not going to get there tomorrow. And then the third methodology is incrementality testing. So these are controlled experiments that allow you to gauge the true lift of your efforts versus what would have happened anyway. These do require significant coordination. If we're testing something in the paid arena, but then SEO or social, organic social does something completely different in that market, it can muddy the results. So it's critical to have integration when executing any sort of incrementality test to gather those clean results that can then speak to the incremental impact. So the three of these together, they answer those different questions. They operate on different horizons, but when they're functioning in unison, you do have a much more complete picture about that user journey over time. And then we looked at some other things too, like brand health as a whole. So are more people, what is your brand market share? Are more people searching for your brand versus competitor brands, which is a nice proxy for market share out there. We certainly don't want to see any dips if we're trying to grow brand awareness. So another really fantastic marker that's always in the back of our mind. All right, then channel strategy. Channel strategy must be organized around a singular, brief, objective, desired outcome, working towards revenue, pipeline, retention in unison. It should be coordinated around that consumer journey, so sequenced strategically to feed into one another. And far too often you will see paid has its own strategy, social has its own strategy, email has its own strategy, content has its own strategy, and there's just no synergy of focus. Maybe they're pushing completely different products than what your audience even wants to buy from you, right? So it's really critical to think about these entities as that connected system, that it's feeding into moving your user through that chaotic journey that it is versus operating independently. And it really, you cannot get here overnight. It does require typically a pretty big shift in how you're strategizing and executing. But knowing that this is the end goal, you can begin to work toward that as a team on the brand side. All right, so now for the fun part. I'm going to turn it over to Megan. I know we sent the short survey before. For those who haven't had a chance to take the survey, here's the QR code again. We're going to dig into the gaps in your system to see how integrated your organizations truly are and the steps that you could potentially take to get to a place where you're operating as a much more functional system.
Well, I'm going to switch. Sweet. So a few things about ideally all of you have taken the quiz and or survey, but a little bit about it. It can be hard to think about integration on like this broad scale of every marketing activity we do, like just thinking about it right now. So I think the way that we pose this was more around a singular campaign in most instances. It's just a smaller unit of marketing that you can clearly conceptualize. How would we work together? How would we feed each other around the customer journey? But yeah, as we go through, we have a couple different categories. We talk about basically everything Emily touched on in the section that you just saw, right? What are these different components of where you need to be integrated to truly have integration and not just alignment? What does it look like? And we're going to go through it, and hopefully people will be willing to share their answers. Oh, nope, sorry. A remote employee, so I'm really not used to the clicker. All right, so for strategic direction, as Emily said, like you definitely can't be integrated if you're working from different goals. And so that's what this part of the survey was really about, is just what does it look like for your team to sit down and define where are we going with this campaign, right? And there's different levels of how that gets integrated. Ooh. Oh no, I clicked something. Oh, I'm so sorry. Okay, got it. So the first question is, how is your marketing strategy determined, right? Literally, what do you guys do when you get in the room together? Then from there, okay, that can define the broader where are we going, but then what do you do to delegate that out to channels, right? What does it look like to actually get them moving towards that strategy? And then as we all know, nothing goes as you expect it when you run a campaign and or any marketing activity. And so pivots do need to take place. What does that look like? When a change happens or when something signals to a specific channel, to a specific person, how does everybody adapt? So first question, and these should be real-time responses. Oh, that looks so tiny. I apologize. So it looks like most people sat in the middle, which is, I'm gonna come on here because I can't read that.
Which is business goals are shared, but each channel translates them directly into its own KPI plan, no shared strategy layer in between.
So does anybody in the room want to talk about, hey, that's where my team sits? What is that, what does that entail? What do you guys see as the biggest barrier to getting to the next step up, which is that strategy plus tactics align to the buyer's journey, right? Everything that Emily said, that it's not just, hey, we sit down, we define a strategy and we go our separate ways, but we actually sit down, we say, here's the strategy, here's how the channels play a role in our audience's journey, so here's what they're going to do, and we assign them kind of their goal in this campaign. Any volunteers? No volunteers? Nobody wants to talk about what does it look like to, like, what's keeping us from being, what are the biggest barriers to being in that number 3? Oh, great. I also can't read your name tag. I apologize. I'm kind of blind. Okay, Tim.
Thinking about my team at Pfizer, and I'm trying to read the, oh, sorry.
Yeah, sorry. People online can't hear.
Hi, everybody. My name's Tim. And I just wanted to offer up, like, as I looked at these questions and a lot that came up, like, for me, where I felt like I just needed to go back and rethink was it's just about the orchestration across channels and tactics. I feel like, and this, just to respond to your question, like where I do think that is where I didn't feel like we necessarily were like crushing it across this question about strategy. And it's like channel tactics are designed to reinforce each other across stages. And again, I do feel like we are very thoughtful about the role that each channel plays across audiences and journeys, but it's that orchestration piece that, sort of like orchestrated strategically, but like, is it really orchestrated? It's not like, X action leads to Y. That's where we, I think, need some help.
Love that. Yeah, I think that is where most people sit, to be honest, is, hey, and that even Emily was talking about our post framework, right? We get in the room, we say, here's the strategies, here's our objectives, here's why we're all doing it. And then we do have channel SMEs in the room to say, okay, yeah, here's how my channel can contribute to that, ideally. But then to your point, it's the orchestration of, okay, but how do those feed together so that email and paid aren't just running in parallel through this whole campaign, but that maybe something that's happening on paid is then informing what we do on email. And I think part of the strategy is defining even what does that look like for this campaign, because it might not even be the same every time you do like an engagement or a strategy for marketing, right? It might need to look different. So yeah, it really is like a system. It is really just like the collaboration need. I don't know if you have anything else.
I'd say there's the strategy piece, and then there's also the technology component too, right? Ensuring appropriate configuration to facilitate some of that orchestration, particularly in an automated fashion. So is your CRM capturing the appropriate data, segmenting your audiences in a meaningful way that paid can then run with that, email can then run with that? Is the sequencing in place to time things in a cadence that are going to be meaningful, not abrasive? So there are many different considerations that go into that, but strategy is the first step.
No, that's a good point, though. Probably the barrier a lot of times is that it's so manual to do this, to be honest, right? So it does kind of start maybe on that tech stack component of how do we set up other things to do that for us. So it's not that, hey, we have to meet weekly to debrief on what happened on my channel or what's going on. But I can look at a dashboard and it's right there for me. Anybody else want to contribute? Oh, go for it, Sharon.
Hi, my name is Sharon. I'm the Vice President of Marketing at a university. And so I manage marketing in a pretty decentralized environment. So that's one of my primary challenges is like, I don't manage the CRM. There's other teams doing emails. There's other teams doing people that don't report up into my area. So that's one of my major challenges. And then my other one is a really long customer journey. It takes people a long time to choose if they're going to go to college, where they go to college. And so on the data end, giving that proper attribution, we are very last touch dependent right now, as which we're working on changing, but that customer journey adds that like additional layer of challenge.
I come from higher ed in my background, so I'm very familiar. And I was saying that even though marketing teams can be dissected in general, you also have dissection sometimes across a customer, like a full customer journey in businesses. For specifically higher ed, we have enrollment marketing typically is their own area. You have student retention and success, which is their own area. So that was all to say though, and I lost my train of thought. I apologize. I forget where I was going with that.
Likely the disconnects being challenging. And in higher education too, you also often have maybe a different online team versus residential, different for undergrad versus graduate, continuing education. So that so much internal fragmentation that can be challenging to piece together, especially if you're leveraging different CRMs and tools that haven't been stitched together to understand how a user may begin their journey exploring undergrad and then eventually progress to graduate programs or start with residential, shift to online. There's probably some duplication in your efforts, reaching the same folks with different messages for different programs, and really finding a way to unify that data is probably a great first step that can.
I was going to say also that's where I was going was that a lot of it starts with education of even those internal stakeholders, right? Because not all of them may see themselves as marketers, right? I think about if we translate it to like something that might be more like concrete for other people is like even when we think about like an e-com space, a lot of times you have a customer service department, you have an e-com team, you have a content team, you might have not a sales team. So even that like starts with just like, hey, realistically, how do we even get all on the same page of we are all different components to a customer journey when we look at it in that crazy place. So yeah, I think that like that brought up another opportunity, just kind of is like, yes, it's the tech, yes, it is the data flowing, but also is everybody from like a high stakeholder standpoint, even on the same page that this needs to happen.
Strategic alignment.
Yeah. Oh. Great. So then I wanted to talk about how channel roles are determined. I think, Tim, you kind of touched on this a little bit, right? Of like, we set them against the strategy and what they can do for the strategy. And that's kind of that middle of the ground, like middle of the road answer is kind of we said by default, right? By default function is like, we think sometimes like paid or search is to do X, right? Meta is to do Y. Email is to do another thing, but when we take them out of those, I won't call those silos, when we take them out of those like such strict boxes, we can start to see like more opportunity for them, I think. And that's really the goal of integration is that, well, let's actually default instead of to what the channel does and what we've traditionally used it for, how do we take a step back and say, here's the journey and just strip all channels away for a second. What is somebody doing here? What do they need? And how can we serve them what they need regardless of channel? And so that's really the difference between 2 and 3. It looks like this chart updated and that people are pretty much neck and neck for 2 and 3. So I would love to talk to some people who are really doing it by journey stage and what that looks like. And I'm talking to people in the room, but I do, the other people live up there in that TV. And if anybody online wants to respond, please feel free. No? Did anybody here answer 3 and want to talk through? I say 3, like the third answer. No? We are running low on time. Do we want to jump ahead?
We'll keep moving.
Cool. Move on. Let's move on from, I think we had a lot of good conversation about the strategic alignment. The next thing, did it again. I'm gonna go all the way over. The next thing is, yeah, you can set strategic direction, but we talked about brand and messaging, and we can think of this on a broad scale or a very condensed scale of brand. Is there just brand alignment? When I look at your organic social media, can I tell what brand it is? That's actually an exercise we do when we do an audit, right? If we stripped out any channel name, do we know who you are just from what you do? And that's realistically what your brand should entail across any channel, anything that you activate. The other thing though is messaging, which I think is what you showed earlier of like, if this is the message that we're trying to get across for this campaign, does it actually look the same across each area, right? Can people connect that we're talking about the same thing, or does it feel completely disconnected? So we have a little bit here. I'm actually just going to stay maybe on this slide and just facilitate conversation since we're running low on time. But I would love to hear from anybody. You know, where did you rate yourself? If there's anybody in the middle of the road on this survey, what did that look like? What's keeping you really from being completely integrated, do you think? Like, what are the biggest barriers when it comes to brand and messaging integration for people? And again, anybody online? Oh, is there? Oh, yeah, you can also just drop it in the chat and John here will read it for us. Okay. I can talk about my clients a little bit if we want to get into it. Oh, sorry, Aaliyah. Oh, here.
I would say what I see happen sometimes with my clients, and sorry, I'm Aaliyah at Red Door, is that we have maybe a consistent start, but then maybe sales don't go the way we thought they would, or we're not getting the performance that we think we need. And so we introduce maybe a new promotion or a new type of messaging that we think will grab people. And sometimes that's a little bit more differentiated from the brand than we thought it would be. And so I feel like that's where sometimes we get a little bit of inconsistency, is like we're trying to capture that performance and it doesn't always match what we want to be. For example, feeling like maybe when we do a heavy promotion, we're like, but we want to be an elevated, sophisticated brand. And so I think that's where some of that comes in, is when maybe things aren't going as smoothly as we would like.
And maybe that's a little reactivity that's being fueled by the strategy as a whole, right? If you have focused on those bottom of funnel tactics, but have neglected to build brand, then yeah, performance might not be going the way that you're hoping. So you throw a new promotion out there, which further degrades the brand instead of adhering to that cohesive message. So it's really going back to broader strategy, keeping tabs on that brand health that can help reduce some of that reactive responsive.
Yeah. Cool. Like people were pretty good on brand. So then we also talked about, okay, you can sit at the upfront, you can define a strategy, you can say, hey, here's how the channels are going to work together towards this strategy. Then you actually have to execute it. And I think sometimes and kind of back to what you were saying, we then break off and we maybe go work towards the goal, right? And then things happen and you pivot in the moment. And that's what these questions really got at. And this really gets back again to, especially when we talk about shifting in operation, is that visibility into data and that connectivity of your platform so that you can see. But I think also it is having the touch points to bring that visibility. Like maybe that is a challenge, right? We launched this campaign, it's not performing well. What do? I think that's where you have to come back to. It's not up to me to just decide in my channel what to do, right? I have to remember that everything is impacting what happens in my channel specifically, right? So maybe paid isn't converting the way I wanted it to. And maybe that is a paid thing. Maybe it is an ad that we need to fix. But you don't know that until you get in the room and the social person says, oh, actually, our stuff is also kind of underperforming. So maybe we just need to go back to the drawing board. Or if you're going to change your ad creative, I need to change my organic stuff that's happening. Or email also did poorly. Maybe email's doing really well. Then we can learn something from email, right? And we could say, okay, well, what did you do maybe a little bit differently than what we did to go back to and tweak what we're doing? Also, like the audience overlap is a big thing here, where a lot of times we're not kind of coordinating with each other. So even though we have these coordinated tactics, we're maybe still cannibalizing a little bit or sending something that doesn't need to happen. I want to take a look, just a peek-sees at how people responded. So it looks like we're pretty aligned. Performance shifts. Does anybody want to speak here? Just knowing that a lot of people answered that they really don't have a lot going on from the performance standpoint. Is this really just a gap in data visibility? I'd love to hear from anybody in the room that put themselves in that lower category. Yeah, sorry, I can also read it. It says only the channel reacts, the others keep doing what they're doing. And I think this is kind of what Aaliyah hinted at, but if anybody has any other thoughts on like what's keeping you from sharing that out, really making that more of a socialized opportunity. Anybody in the chat?
I can say from what I've seen, it's teams don't always understand the impact of their practice area on others. So maybe not quite grasping what should be surfaced. And then Tim, did you have something?
Yeah. Hi, Tim again. And it relates to what I shared before. Again, I do think like we meet like on a monthly basis across channels, looking at the metrics as a cohesive team. So everyone has insight into how certain channels are performing, but I still don't think, like, are we really applying, like when we see channel behavior, I still think we're sort of focused like a laser on how is that impacting that particular channel and not really having a robust conversation about how we might apply those learnings elsewhere. I still think our orientation is towards channel. So it's an interesting question because, again, we are meeting as a whole team. We're looking at all the results across channels together, but I still think we're focused on channel performance.
I actually had a conversation with one of my clients about this because you can get in a room, you can do everybody can be there, you can be ready to speak on your channel, but it's about having the right prompts for that discussion, right? And I think that's such a big part of integration is what is everybody's responsibility when they come to the table. And it's probably not, hey, here's my metrics, right? And here's my KPI slide of how things are going. Or if that is their prompt, then everybody else plays a role of like, what can I take away from this, right? Go ahead, Zach.
No, this is Zach at Red Door. I've been on the brand side previously, and something that we did was, yes, we looked at KPIs on a weekly basis per channel, and if you were at 80% to your target, you had to come with why and what the plan is, and if you were at 120% or over, what's working well and how to build on that success. So it was, yes, you're in the room together and you're still focused on channel, but it's why are we underperforming or overperforming in certain areas?
Hi, it's Erica. I actually have a question back for Tim. So if we want to pass the other microphone back to him. Hi, Tim.
Hi, Erica.
I'm curious about what you said and what do you think it would take to get to that next step in order to have those conversations? What is the barrier?
It's interesting because I've been thinking about that since I last spoke, and I really think it comes down to a very tactical thing, which is time. Like we struggle, we are blessed with so much data, so many metrics that monthly meeting that we have, we're challenged just to get through looking at the metrics together. Like it's a race just to like, oh, okay, that's what the numbers say. So it's having additional time together, like everyone comes in from a channel, they have all their metrics, they actually have gone through and, they've made recommendations about what they should do, but it's like that additional step of like just having the time to think through it and then come back together. So it feels like it's a very tactical thing about time together to talk about it.
So potentially some system design, right? Like if you could design your processes to accommodate that time, that collaboration, that application, then maybe you can see some movement there in Erica.
Just another thought that we've been talking about as an organization is like a pre-read on the numbers, right? Like the pre-work is that goes out to the team is here are the numbers, here are the metrics, here's the why. Everyone comes to that meeting knowing that information, and that so people don't have to be reading 10 people are in the room all reading the same things. They do the pre-work.
That's a really good point.
So
Yeah.
that then the agenda is like you better come with the pre-work because we're gonna have conversations that you better know about, and then opening up that space to actually have that brainstorm and solve rather than just report.
Yeah. No, that's great.
Brent Bernasconi from the San Diego Tourism Authority. And I kind of wanted to build on that time because a lot of our brand campaigns are not done kind of internally, right? Our agency of record is working with National Geographic or third-party platforms like Stellar. And so when I think about like when performance shifts, sometimes we can't really react to that because we don't get any information from those platforms until either the roundup or halfway through. So in terms of time, like we're just kind of waiting and seeing what's happening. So I feel like that's kind of like only that channel reacts because we have no insight into what's actually happening during that campaign.
I don't know. I mean, that is a really interesting point because I also was thinking about the pre-work component and like making sure that the meeting's working as hard for you as you can. I think it's interesting when you bring in the agency side, right? Because now you're talking about they need to build in that agility for me to be able to effectively utilize it, which I would find to be an appropriate conversation to bring to your account manager on that side, just saying like, hey, we'd love to use this a little bit more. I'd love more than just like a wrap up at the end. I know for our clients, we have a lot of dashboards running in real time that they have access to, right? So we might still only bring a wrap campaign report or like a mid campaign, like we have built-in touch points, but at any time we can go in and see what's happening. Do we need to pivot? And you would also have access to that. But
we've also shifted our approach to KPI reporting as a whole internally in response to that, right? We had a lot of clients saying, by the time I get the performance results, it feels like it's too late to make decisions. So we've pivoted, and what we do for many clients is early in the month. So, week 1, we review a dashboard that is walking through all the top line metrics, some key takeaways about prior month's performance. And then a week or two later, we connect, and it's more of a deeper dive insights report that's intended to be actionable. So moving forward, how can we continue to improve the program? So slightly different approach. It's not just a deck with 50 pages of how things went last month. We try to consolidate that into the dashboards we've already built out anyway, and instead channel our time into how can we do things differently going forward. Yes, we do have the 3 things to know in the dashboard report. So you still get the insights you need from the prior month. We're just not walking through that in a deck that makes eyes glaze over, and instead focusing on what we can do to be more productive in that deck development.
The other thing I will just add on to that, and I know we're at time, is just making sure that they're aware of all the other activities that you have going on that could impact, right? Ideally, they do have some idea of what you guys are running, but similarly to what we talked about earlier, of like, it's kind of, you don't know what you don't know, right? And so if you're like, hey, I just need to know XYZ so that we can keep the train moving, they should be able to also then give you some insights that allow you to take that and run with it across your other channels. Just speaking from somebody who sometimes we don't have a ton of visibility into the other activities, so we don't know what to share and what's important to impact those things.
Yeah, communication.
Yes,
Definitely
communication. Love it. We're at time. Honestly, all these questions were so interconnected. Oh, this guy's not working anymore, is it?
Yeah, I think we've had some great conversations. We'll definitely follow up with your personal results and a more personalized insights report. So know that just today's conversation is not the extent of our discussion, and we can give you a much more personalized take on your survey results. But we'd like to leave you with this final question. What's one thing you'll start doing after today?
Hi, everyone. I'm Tim. No, clearly, one thing I'm going to do, and this is just a way of saying thank you. Thank you for the thoughtful presentation, the questions themselves in the setup, just helped think through, again, where necessarily are we at. So again, just one way of saying at the close, thank you for putting this together. One thing that I'll be doing is just thinking about that cadence of activities, right? Because you just described the 50 pages deck that people's eyes glaze over, and that's that meeting we have, and I mean, there's use in it, but it's not probably the most proactive. So that would be the one thing I'd be doing is thinking about that process.
Love that. Anybody else want to share one thing? Awesome. I was looking over this way.
Hi, Connor. I think one thing I'm going to do is just make sure I have really good measurement and look at different attribution models. Like you brought up that the customer journey is getting increasingly complex, and we often go to first or last click, but I'm going to start to look more across the entire journey and possibly at time decay as an attribution model moving forward.
That's great. And like Emily said, if you submitted your email when you did the survey, that will send you through your results, have all the things, and we'll provide a little bit of like, hey, here's where we see opportunity, or here's what we talked about today, just because we weren't able to get through everything.
Thank you guys so much.